We have kept silent for so many years about our experiences, but when people began to deny that the Holocaust ever happened, we realized that we couldn't keep silent any longer.
Oregon lawmakers are honoring the memory of a Holocaust survivor with a bill that would require schools to teach about the Holocaust and other genocides. Alter Wiener died last year after a driver hit him in Hillsborough. He was a prisoner in Nazi war camps during World War II, and he pushed for genocide education in schools. The bill would require school districts to teach curriculums that make students think about the morality of the Holocaust and learn about the causes of genocides. Many students spoke in favor of the bill at a hearing today.
The effect of not providing decent Holocaust education is seen throughout school. Kids constantly joke about Nazis and Hitler, and as a Jew, this is terrifying.
If passed, the bill would take effect during the 2020-2021 school year.